Hey everyone, welcome to this month's Hero Lab webinar. I'm very excited for this one because I think we are going to take a little bit of a pivot in the topics that we cover and cover something that many people have been emailing me about and asking me about on social media in terms of, overall frustration. I think is the best word to put it. Just coaches and parents and gymnasts and, gym owners just emailing me or contacting me mostly from the podcast and saying, I love what you're saying and this and that, but I'm just so frustrated. I'm just so tired. I'm burnt out. There's just so much work. We have cultural friction. We have kids that don't want to work hard. We have so many skills to get, and it's so hard to fit all these things in when there's not enough hours. And I feel people, man, I totally get it because this is something that I have absolutely struggled with as a coach, as a medical provider, as just in my own personal life, is trying to find ways to work in gymnastics and work in such a brutally tough sport, especially in our time of chaos with everything going on with cultural change in gymnastics, and really trying to figure out ways to be happier and healthier, in my day-to-day life, and also try to spread that to my coworkers or my friends or my, athletes that we work with. And so I wanted to take the benefit of all the people I'm lucky to have in my life that are super successful, elite and college coaches or medical providers or business people or, just people I've been really lucky to work with on the Olympic, athlete side or professional athlete side who seem to have a lot of these habits they recommend to me. And over the last 8 years, especially as I started my career and I've gone through this, I've learned a lot from reading a lot of books and talking with people and doing the podcast. And so I wanted to take a little bit of a turn away from the geekier stuff we normally do and see if we could, help people out with this. Because I really do think, as I'll allude to in the lecture, I think that this kind of concepts and these base root ideas are really at the foundation of many of the other problems that people have in gymnastics with their frustrations with the sport and kind of what's going on and all of the different assets that we're trying to use to fix the sport is kind of up in the air right now. People are a little confused. They don't know how to act. They're kind of nervous about, changing and things like that, which is normal. But I think that it's important we have this conversation if we want any long-term progress to be made. So you may be asking, why in the world do we want to start here? And I think that, again, the more that I studied the problems that we have, injuries, burnout, skills, kids that can't move up in levels, kids that struggle with flexibility, kids that aren't motivated to be in the gym, coaches that are just unhappy and don't want to change their ideas about approaches to training, the more that I looked at the science of the technical solutions, so like flexibility or strength conditioning or actually doing repetitions and training hours, the more I found out that it really comes down to people. Changing people and encouraging change in your culture are really what I think is all about. I don't know if there's any situation I've dealt with on the medical side or the coaching side of my personal life that it didn't have to involve some degree of changing people's behavior, right? Like, how do you change someone's mindset and people's values? How do you change people's openness to learn? How do you change people not wanting to live through their ego or other people's approval? Like, what are the things we can do to try to encourage ourselves to be changing, but also to influence change in the athletes we coach or people we work with. And so that's why I found this quote, I don't know where, but I really thought that this resonated well, is if you want to improve the world, start by improving yourself, right? If you want to change your gym, I think you need to take some accountability for yourself. And this is definitely a harsh lesson that I've had to learn, and a lot of things I'll share is it wasn't until I admitted the things that were going not so great in my own personal life that I was kind of carrying the negative tone with me into the gym that things started to improve. Or, a lot of these habits that we'll talk about, are maybe a little bit more challenging up front, but they lead to much longer term progress down the road with the kids and with the athletes you work with or the coaches you coach with, or how to have these conversations to make the culture actually move the needle forward. So I think in this massive time of change, we're seeing that these are some of the things that need to happen. They're just not happening because they're challenging and they're hard, and they lead to a lot of deep-seated issues or insecurities people have, or, value-based concepts. So I think that everything we talk about so far in the Hero Lab does have some sort of base here. And I think you guys have probably picked that up from some of the conversations that we have in the group. So I think that it comes from my own personal experiences, things I've done to travel and speak with people, but also a lot of books that I like. And I think this is probably a much more prominent issue than we admit, but everybody just kind of has this undertone of being unhappy or frustrated, burnt out, or being unfulfilled and feeling like work is just another just like mundane thing you have to work your way through. It's not fun, it's not exciting to be in the gym all the time. And there's definitely points of unhappiness that you should be, it's challenging. Not everyone's going to have a rosy day all the time, but as a whole, you should be happy with coaching. You should be happy with working gymnastics or judging or whatever you're doing, or as a parent or as a medical provider, you should be happy with what you're doing. I think that if, you're just going through the motions and you're miserable every day, I think that it's really no way to spend your time, because obviously we spend like 60% of our life working. And so if it's not something that's happy, it's going to be pretty upsetting to go look back and be like, oh, I wish I had done things differently. So one of the reasons I was talking with Allie and Arnold and Nick on separate podcasts about this is I think that our society and our gymnastics culture has this supposed to mindset, right? You're supposed to have these kids at this age do these skills in this level. You're supposed to have this rate of progression. It's supposed to be this long before you learn a skill. You're supposed to get to high school and have these skills. You're supposed to be recruited at this age. You're supposed to, on a personal level, go through whatever experiences you have and then find a job and make money and then like find someone and whatever, have a family, have kids, get this, get older, be happy, retire. Like there's very good arbitrary supposed to landmarks that I think as we see are actually the rarity. They're not the majority of people following those. I think a lot of driver of people's unhappiness is when they have these expectations of their life, like, oh, I'm this now, I'm supposed to do this, right? And that doesn't work out exactly like how they thought it would, and those expectations are not met, and then like they get upset about that, versus maybe having, okay, what matters for me? What do I want to approach? Like, what are my goals? And having those things work themselves out based on your timeline. I think that we all have an experience where something we thought was going to go one way and it went drastically the other way. And we look back and we go, oh, well, actually, in the long run, I didn't mind how it worked out because it led me to this opportunity, or I met this person, or who knows, there's a million different options. But if you're constantly thinking about what you're supposed to do versus what you want to do, I think that's going to be a very big generator of some unhappiness. So I'd like to take a little bit of a break from what we normally talk about and kind of walk through some advice that I've gotten that has really helped me, some books that I've read, and some concepts that I think are really important if we expect to, make any sort of change in injury rates or burnout rates or our own personal level of happiness working in the sport moving forward. Okay, so there's not, there is science involved in a lot of these things, but it's not nearly compared to as much as we normally have in a lecture. But there is good research to support a few things. One is that the people who are happier and healthier tend to be more successful with work, right? They're more productive. They increase the productivity of the people around them. And also they have a much, longer career term happiness, right? They're not just like burnt out for the first 10 years. Then all of a sudden, like poof, one day they're happy. That's really not how it works. If you look at some studies from like Google and some studies from different positive psychology research we'll talk about, it actually has found that those people who tend to enter their workforce with a happier or healthier approach, they do have much better competitive results. And that's been shown on the business side, but then also on the sports performance side with like professional teams, so NBA, NFL, Olympic level athletes and things like that. And then also on the physiological side, so in terms of like just healthiness, in terms of stress, acute stress is what our body's designed for. But if you carry around constant chronic stress from not sleeping enough, not eating well, not being happy at work, traffic, you're unhappy with your personal relationships, or maybe you're not really spending your time on things that you care about. Those wear and tear benefits of chronic stress are very, very serious in terms of your chronic disease for heart problems or blood pressure or psychological issues, things like that, depression and all those sorts of anxieties. Those things are significantly correlated together. So along with having the obvious performance progress that you probably want to see out of your athletes, out of your coworkers, and out of yourself, there are many scientifically backed health benefits for trying to attack some of these issues. So diving in here, if you are curious about those nerdy things, there's three kind of sections of book, right? So the psychological aspect of happiness. Sean Anker is a Harvard researcher or Harvard professor who studied like 1,700 people about what makes them the top 25 most happy versus the top 25 most miserable, or the bottom 25, I guess you would say. And he has a really, really good kind of like steps and walkthrough about how those things correlate to a business side, but also a productivity side. And then Martin Seligman was one of the fathers of positive psychology research. He spent so much time with Fortune 500 companies and sports teams and stuff like that, talking about, what actually contributes to long lasting happiness versus just like, temporary, pleasure-filled activities, like the short-term high of food or like all that kind of stuff they talk about in terms of people covering up maybe some of their unhappiness. So he has a lot of really good research there. On the sports psychology side for like competitive results, James Clear did a big journal biography and book on the All Blacks, which are a very successful rugby team. And the Clapton's class here by Sam Walker is more about, again, sports psychology and competitive advantage and things like that. It's not all about happiness and stuff like that, but it does have some really good theories of leadership that I think are directly relevant to kind of what we're doing. And then on the really geeky, like, health physiological side, we have allostatic load, and Jay Shulk's work is very, very interesting to see how the body responds to acute versus chronic stress. And then Robert Sapolsky is a legend in this field. This book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, really highlights, again, acute versus chronic stress. And in our modern day environment, with what like traffic and what, not being fulfilled and not sleeping enough or not eating well or constantly being worried about taxes and kids getting skills and competitions and what people think of you, like all those things are wrapped up into stress responses. And I think his work is very, very instrumental to me. So I recommend people check it out. These are the 9 things that I think have made the biggest difference in my life. And I also have noticed in patterns of Olympians that I work with, or professional athletes, or elite level coaches on the NCAA or the Olympic side of gymnastics. And then also just like business stuff and, positive role models that I try to follow. So we'll work through these things one by one, but this list is just a snapshot of where we're going. Okay. So number 1, basics, basics, basics. I start with this one because it is the most obvious, but it is the least followed, right? Practical advice is always something you hear about, but don't often follow. And so I had some harsh lessons in my early career when I was hitting the gas pedal pretty hard at a grad school. But just simple things that you should do more of that you don't, that are probably causing high stress and unhappiness, right? So sleeping in 7 to 8 hours per night, eating well most of the time, trying to exercise regularly 4 to 5 times per week, drink a lot of water, and building in some time to not be super busy with work, right? 5 very basic concepts that make up such a difference in people's happiness levels and their productivity levels, but don't happen either because they don't value them or because, the myth and the misunderstanding around, work and grinding and pushing and being successful and this and that is that you got to burn the candle, you got to just like make it through, you got to white knuckle it and just beat all the competition. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not how our body works. And if you look at even the most successful people in the world that you think are just complete maniacs with work or success or productivity, if you really got a peek behind the curtain, you would see that a lot of these things are not what they seem, right? They may have this outward appearance that they sleep 5 hours and they just eat whatever they want. They rarely exercise and they just live off coffee and they never ever take a break. It's not true, right? And I've fortunately had access to some of these people that I thought at the time were those kind of grind it out no matter what people. And even they have moments where they have to take a step back and take care of themselves, or they get 5-10 years into it and the thread unravels and they get really sick. So as someone who went through a little bit of that burnout early in my career because I was working so much, I learned the lesson the hard way, right? So doing more of those things and less of like these kind of staying up till 11, 12, watching TV after you get home from work, not sleeping enough, and then just pounding caffeine all day long to get away, not really caring about your nutrition, exercising if you have time here and there or not at all, drinking anything but water, right? I put that in question marks because everyone has a difference there. Some people it's wine, some people it's coffee, or never actually planning time to do things that you find make you less stressful or having more time to do. Like, sorry, I just have too much to do. I got to work. There's just my laundry list is too long. I have to be productive. There's no time for that, right? All these things are just very, very unhealthy long-term, and they will eventually bite you in the butt. Okay, so sleep, right? So just my recommendations, these 2 books are amazing. Matthew Walker's The Geekier Side. He's a PhD Stanford researcher. Ariana Huffington is a very successful business practitioner. So just little things here, right? Trying to go to bed and wake up at the same time. And I'll share my personal advice as we go through. I try to go to bed around 10. I try to wake up around 5:30 or 6. Some days, if I'm really exhausted, I sleep until 7, right? It is what it is. I can't force myself to get 4 hours, 5 hours of sleep multiple days in a row and not make it. I'm grumpy. I'm irritable. I'm definitely crankier. I have some like mood swings. So it's really, really bad if I don't get enough sleep. But I try my best to be, I'm usually home at 9, do all my stuff, get the day ready for tomorrow, whatever. I'm trying to get in bed and be reading by 9:30. And that helps me to, slowly kind of get a better night's sleep. And I find that if I do that routine every single time, even if I only get 7 hours or 6 hours of sleep, I don't feel as crappy the next day. So 30 minutes before you go to bed, trying to not watch TV, don't be on social media, try your best to not be on an iPad or whatever it is. You can use the night shift function on like iOS and other things that turns it to orange to help block some of the blue light. They also have blue light blocking glasses that I found very helpful that you wear for 30 minutes, and it kind of blocks your eyes from the artificial light. If you can, trying to avoid food, caffeine, or alcohol 2 hours before you go to bed. And then if you can, trying to keep no technology in your room and trying to keep it nice and dark and nice and cool. I bought blackout curtains for my room that are very, very helpful. And I don't have any technology in my bed besides the light, right? So no phone, no iPad, no nothing. It's just bed, books, and, you know, my clothes and stuff like that. There's nothing else. But that's very, very helpful. On the eat well side, nutrition is such a beast of a topic, and I really think people over analyze it or over complicate it, right? So as a rule of thumb, try to eat real foods and mostly water, right? That's 90% of the time I try my best to eat, you know, organic food that is from the earth, that doesn't have processed sugar, it doesn't have junk, it doesn't have artificial manufactured stuff, you know, all the things, again, you know, that are probably important, you know, mostly vegetables, mostly water, trying to eat lean sources of protein and carbohydrates, complex carbs like rice or things like that. Everybody has food preferences or food sensitivities, but if you get away with just basically doing okay most of the time, chances are you're going to be fine, right? So during the week, I try my best to meal prep and try to get all of my stuff done on Sunday so I eat good food. And then on the weekends, when I'm out with my friends, if I'm doing stuff, I splurge, I do whatever I want. I had a whole carton of Ben & Jerry's 2 weeks ago with a couple of my friends because it was a Friday night and we were just all hanging out. Like, I'm not judging myself at all. Also, if you are into it, right, like trying to figure out things that you're sensitive to or doing other weird stuff. Like I've been trying some intermittent fast and time restricted feeding. Some of the stuff is good for me. Some of it's not, right? Food sensitivities, I work with a nutritionist and she helps me out. I've learned some things that are more sensitive to my stomach or I have allergies to. That helped me out too. But I do it. If it works for me, I keep it. If not, I abandon it. There's a lot of stuff that I've tried, just hasn't really fit my lifestyle. I just move on. But I guarantee that people, like I said, if you do 90-10 rule on mostly real foods and water, you'll probably be okay, right? And save those things that you enjoy for later in the week or every once in a while here and there. These 2 books on the side are really good. How Not to Die is like a scary title, but it's actually very, very informative in terms of like what the science around healthier food says. Same thing with Mark Hyman's book, pretty famous. So 2 books that are really good. Okay. Just like this with exercise, there's a spectrum here, right? So on one side of the fence, there are just like basic things to get more activity, right? Park farther away at work, take the stairs, go for a 5 to 10 minute walk at lunch, try to do 1 exercise class per week, right? At the bare minimum, I think most people could do that pretty fine. Then you kind of bump up to the next level, which is all right, try to do those things, but then also like 30 minutes, couple days per week, try to do some sort of exercise, right? Try to just go for a light jog, try to take a class, try to do some weightlifting, whatever you're into, yoga, doesn't really matter. Then the next level up is trying to do a 3-day plan of just kind of lifting and cardio together. And then lastly, doing more organized stuff like a pickup soccer game, pickup basketball game, work out with the kids once a week when you train. All sorts of stuff matters that you get all the way up to like the final end of the spectrum, which is like more of a structured 3 to 5 days, cycle, program, stuff like that. So whether you're, 1 flight of stairs is exercise for you every day and that's it, or if you can finally get into a more structured program that you've been wanting to with the help of someone, then I think that's great. Whatever works, but it'd be challenging to go through all the research that talks about the positive benefits of a little bit of exercise. So these books are really good. Self-plug because I believe that Champion, the facility that we work at, has some of the best strength coaches around. So check out all their YouTube channels and things like that. There's plenty of stuff on there to help you out. Hydration, another beating a dead horse here. Drink water most of the time, all day. I don't think that coffee is a bad thing in moderation. Same thing with alcohol and same thing with whatever else. But for the majority of time, it should be water. It should be some other things that are a little bit more basic in nature, right? So I'm not going to go into it more than this, but carry a water bottle all day, drink a lot, don't be miserable, don't be dehydrated, don't be cranky because of that, right? And then lastly, I think this is one that I personally had to push myself very hard to do. I was challenged in my younger career to take time for myself and have activities that I really enjoyed doing. I felt like I had to work all the time and it didn't work. It didn't go well. So things that have helped me is scheduling time in your weekly calendar to watch that show you want to watch or go out with some friends to a dinner or take a day to go somewhere and go to the beach or whatever it is, not just saying like, oh, I'll get there when I get there, but trying to make yourself actually stick to it, turning your phone off, right? Turning your computer off, not doing those things, not answering emails, not on social media, stuff like that. Like a couple hours of that goes a long, long way in terms of your mental health, right? So the next thing you can do kind of like step up wise is getting some trips and taking a 3-day, weekend to yourself where you auto respond to your email that you're on vacation and you just get away from the world. And then obviously trying to take some longer ones. I try to do one long weekend every few months where I'm really not connected to the world. I'm just doing what I enjoy, going to concerts, reading books, trying to hang out with my friends, stuff like that. And then once a year, I try to now do a longer like week, right? I'll take a week off every few months or like 6 to 12 months, somewhere in that range of just, trying my best to not be, tied to work so much. So that really helps. And a lot of people are always like, well, I can't get the money for that. It's impossible to get time off, blah, blah, blah with work. But I have found a very helpful strategy of a fund, right? So one or two less coffees bought from Starbucks per week, or not buying a pizza once per month, or going out to dinner once less per month, or donating some of the clothes you have on whatever and getting it on Facebook Marketplace and selling those, right? Not buying as much clothes or not much materialistic things. If you can, those things add up very quick, right? If you can get $3 or $4 per week from a coffee and some clothing you sell, and maybe not going out and eating from home, grocery shopping, you can easily get, $100, $200, $300 back that you can have a day to yourself, right? To do stuff that you want. I think that they add up over time if you were just kind of analyze those finances. And that helped me a lot to get more time off from work, to have some space to think and to just enjoy my free time. So highly recommend those things. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about more is kind of getting to the coaching side, getting into the cultural side of gymnastics. So I think that self-awareness and having a growth mindset are probably the most important foundational things that you can do, right? So self-awareness goes back to what we just talked about is what makes me happy? Am I drinking enough water? Am I eating enough healthier foods? Am I working out regularly? All those kind of things are important for you to know what makes you happy, makes you healthy, right? Everyone's different. Everyone has different approach to these things. But self-awareness to what you want out of your personal life and what you want out of your work life sets the foundation for you to have that conversation with other people. And on a growth mindset based, right, being able to constantly just learn and read and have more ideas come to you versus just being fixed mindset, which is, what I'm doing is always fine. It's going to work and I don't really need to listen to anybody. And these two books are really good. So Insight is more about self-awareness first, and then it talks about, getting feedback from others. And Carol Dweck's book about, mindset of growth mindset versus fixed mindset has been pretty instrumental in terms of the impact that it had on me and many, many other people. So on this point here, I would say this is huge, right? Back to the societal factors as opposed to is most people don't want to follow what they really want out of life and ignoring society or culture's norms for what they should do out of fear of judgment, fear of criticism, or fear of something new or not knowing the result, right? And that is definitely very challenging. But I think that once you can slowly expose yourself to more conversations, journaling or talking with your friends about what you want out of life versus what you think people should do, really makes you quite a bit happier in your day-to-day life because you feel better about making decisions for your daily habits and your choices and stuff like that. So I highly recommend that people take a lot of time to journal and think about, why am I coaching? Why am I involved in gymnastics? Why do I work as a medical provider? Why do I want to still do all these things that I have planned? When you map out those things based on what your values are and what you want out of life, it's much easier to follow the daily habits that you set for yourself versus worrying about what other coaches think about you, worrying about what the parents think about you, worrying about what other parents think about you, worrying about, what your friends on social media are doing and stuff like that. Like it's very hard to keep that constant comparison mindset and truly follow the things that make you happy. Okay. Moving on from here, which is very close to this one we just talked about, right? Everybody has heard the phrase keeping up with the Joneses, right? I think that's a hilarious term that still is very relevant in our day and age, right? In terms of seeing people on social media, seeing other gyms with, these levels of skills or these competitions or what they're winning or what they're doing, right? And Jordan Peterson has an amazing chapter in 12 Rules for Life. And I forget exactly what chapter it is, but it says compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not who somebody else is today. And I think that is a very, very good quote to take away. So you should sit down. A lot of these questions come from this book over here, Designing Your Life, which is again from a Stanford class. Bill Burnett and Dave Evans are professors at Stanford, I believe, and they made this class for college students to kind of figure out what they want to do in life, and then they made it into a book, and it was really cool to read that. But asking yourself these questions when you're journaling, right? What matters to me? Like, what are my values? What things do I care about and actually make me really, really happy, right? How much money and work and stuff do I need? Like, do you need X amount of money to be successful, or do you need more money just because you want to buy more stuff, right? Is that stuff actually bringing you happiness, or is it just like extra clothes and extra food and extra whatever, right? There's some things that I have no problem spending money on. There's some things that I know I just bought money on when I was younger because I was trying to impress other people, right? So you really got to think about that. How much money do I need? How much do I actually need to work to get that financial income to cover my expenses? And what kind of stuff do I actually value and want to have? What are my goals long-term career-wise? What are my goals for life? Do I, want to have a certain job? Do I want to have a certain title? Do I want to work a certain amount of hours or make a positive impact on the world? Like whatever it is. Why do I want certain things? Is it for my own personal health and my happiness, or is this because I'm seeking approval from somebody else? Really important one. What are my biggest fears and worries? Like that one's a tough conversation to have, but if you can sit down and iron that one out, you'll have a lot of clarity on why certain things bring up insecurities or fears. And then another really tough one off that is like, are there any vices or bad habits that you have versus virtues, right? What are those things that maybe you shouldn't be doing, right? Like again, that 5 hours of sleep, sucking down 4 cups of coffee a day, not working out, gossiping a little bit too much, spending too much time on social media, those kind of things, versus your good habits, and mapping out why you think those are good habits or not. And then once you kind of have all those questions, again, this may take a few months to figure out, you start to say, okay, based on my goals, what habits do I need to do every day that map a successful path to those long-term goals, right? If I want to become a certified strength and conditioning coach, which is one some people have taught me about. Like they think that it's really important for them in the gym to learn about strength and conditioning. I say, okay, I want to get my CSCS. What's the goal? Well, you have to buy the textbook. You have to set an hour or two a day per reading for reading. You have to try to go to some strength courses. You have to spend probably a solid 2 months reading the book that they put out. You have to try to organize yourself to study for the test. You have to figure out how long it's going to be before you take the test. You have to get the financials to pay for the book and for the test. You have to have some clinical experience teaching these movements and things like that, right? There's like 8 or 9 habits right there every day that you have to do, or smaller goals to take off to the bigger goal of getting your CSCS, right? Maybe you do want to work out more. Maybe you want to try to work out 4 days per week. Well, I need to find a place to work out. I need a program to follow. I need to get a movement assessment to make sure I know what exercises are good for me. I need to maybe find a whole bunch of podcasts that I can listen to while I run, because that's something that helps me get through. Get some new music playlists, whatever that should be. Maybe find someone to work out with. I need to block it out in my schedule for a half hour first thing in the morning. All of those things map towards your successful progresses. But if your habits and your choices every day don't map to your goals, then you're never going to make progress. So I think that all those things kind of add up to how you make progress towards it, is whether that's coaching new skills, whether that's exercising more, whether that's getting a new degree, whether that's sleeping more. All those things have to come from, what are my values? What are my habits? Okay, the next one here, something that I learned a lot from this book in the top right-hand corner called The Liberated Mind. He's the creator of a certain therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, which I thought was very interesting to read about. But essentially, he says that a lot of people, unfortunately, are not comfortable with negative emotions or negative feelings. And so they tend to go for avoidance, right? And I think this makes total sense when I was reading through it, right? So avoidance being numbing themselves, escapism, or distraction, right? So thinking about in my coaching life, it was, clearly seeing behavior from some of the athletes that was not appropriate, that was not okay in terms of the attitude they had, the gossip they were saying, the lack of work ethic or something like that. And instead of having a hard conversation with them, I would just say, oh, that's just Judy, right? That's just how Judy works. I don't know who Judy is, but that's just Judy. She's just lazy. She's never going to change. And it's, her parents are this, and she's just entitled, or like, kids these days, all these ways to avoid the conversation, which was a one-on-one hard conversation about why the athlete isn't working hard, why the athlete isn't coming to practice, why they're talking instead of taking their side stations and all that kind of stuff, and avoiding the harder conversation and just, gossiping with another coach versus actually dealing with the problem is one example. But then also there's plenty of other examples that people have in their personal life that I had as well, right? So avoiding, I'm trying to think of another one. Avoiding trying to go to sleep, right? Or like I said, staying up for 5 hours, and instead of, actually saying, well, why do I not actually want to go to bed instead of getting all this work done? Why do I not want to work out? Why do I choose to scroll through social media for an hour instead of actually doing all these things that I need to do? You have to dig into some of those problems and figure out why, and you get to the root of it, and you're like, oh, that is a tough conversation to have, but it's definitely better than sweeping it under the rug, right? And I've found many, many instances when, if you do take the time to lean into some of those uncomfortable conversations with the gymnast, coworkers, or coaches, or even yourself, the positive results on the other side of that make for massive, massive changes in your happiness levels, instead of just sweep it under the rug, sweep it under the rug, sweep it under the rug, right? Maybe the conversation with that gymnast shouldn't happen in the middle of practice, in the middle of a workout, but it should happen after practice, one-on-one, or in a separate meeting with their parents or something like that. Or, maybe you can have this conversation with a friend or something like that and ease your mind or something that's going on. But definitely just, isolating yourself or trying to be stoic and Spartan and just bare knuckle it is not going to work a long time. You have to be okay having those conversations. I do want to say here, the other book by Rick Hansen is very, very good as well. So now what we do is once you kind of have those conversations with yourself, is you expand them out to like the next step, right? So you do it with yourself first. I think journaling is really helpful for me. I have like about 1,000 moleskins. If you guys have ever seen on the podcast or on the screen, you can see all these moleskins that I have. Those are all filled with all these things that I've gone through in the last 8 years. But I find that it helps to first do that with yourself or with a friend you trust, and then you can progress that to cultural issues, right? Like I said, something happening in the gym or at work, or the kids aren't working hard enough, or nobody wants to do strength, or there's all these fears, or everybody's back hurts, or nobody comes to practice, or my coworkers don't want to change, or my boss is just not receptive to new ideas. All these things that come from a culture point of view only start when you have that conversation with yourself and figure out how to have that honest professional conversation solo before with other people. So another really good book up here, Type R, is very similar to Rick Hansen's. And then also the Culture Code is expanding this concept to groups and environments. He follows some of the most successful restaurants in New York, some NBA teams, a lot of big high profile business world people, and kind of combines what makes some cultures really positive and successful and long-term thrive versus what makes some really unsuccessful and fall apart. Okay. Favorite quote from Miss Val about this is that anyone can tell you anything as long as it's honest and respectful. And we have adopted that quite significantly in our gym, and it has been very, very helpful for some of these radical conversations that are tough to have. Okay. And then going off of this as well, so being able to have candid conversations, I think it goes back to my concept about not wanting to have tougher conversations because sometimes they unveil or unravel a lot of root level issues or insecurities or fears, right? Fears that gymnasts have, insecurities they have, fears that coaches have about how people look at them or view them, or judgment, or their own personal lives and things like that. There's a lot of deeper seated issues that kind of come out with getting to the root of a problem. But this book by Kim Scott is very helpful to talk about. She talks about in a business sense, but how do you have these conversations? What's the proper respectful way to do this? What setting should you do it in? Especially with kids, it's really hard to have these. But I think that if you can do, some of this work to learn the skills, you can have these conversations with coaches and gymnasts and parents, your friends, your family, especially parents and gymnasts themselves. Sometimes it's really hard to have these conversations, but in the long run, it saves yourself so much time and headache that you have to do it. I think it gets to the root of the problem. And like I said, just try to make sure it's the right timing, the right context, the right privacy and stuff like that. And I can give everybody an example. There was definitely a situation where, in our gym, we were having some big frustrations around athletes who were saying they wanted to move up in levels, get new vaults, get new skills. But then when we actually started to work out, they just wanted to talk. They just wanted to sit in the side stations. They just wanted to socialize. They didn't really seem like they were, hungry and motivated to work out. And the coaches got really frustrated and they were like, this is so upsetting when we put so much time and effort into the rotation schedules and stuff like that, but the kids don't want to do any drills. They don't want to make progress. And, we finally got down to a conversation about, guys, why is vault so brutal? Why does no one want to do anything? And they were like, well, to be honest, we are all just a little scared of our vault, right? Like we don't want to flip because we don't feel ready. The stations are boring. We've done the same stations for the last 2 months. We don't really think they're helping. And to be completely honest, sometimes we see you guys just standing at the end of the vault runway talking, and it doesn't feel like you guys care. And that was a little uncomfortable, right? That was a very painful conversation. But what it led to was us realizing, like, okay, maybe we're not quite ready to flip these vaults yet, and we need to go back to some of the basics and technical drills. Maybe we need to research some new ideas about drills, talk to some coaches, and figure out better ways to go about these things. And then maybe we as coaches need to do a better job with spreading ourselves out, not being, congregating in one little corner and just talking or standing together and things like that. So we accepted our part of the bargain in terms of what needed to change, but we also had that conversation with them. We're like, okay, well, the not good thing to do is to skip the drills and talk and make it seem like you guys don't care. Number 2 is it is up to you to figure out why you are scared and work on these things to help improve them. And 3, just as much as we don't need to be standing around, you guys need to be accountable to not, stand in line 4 or 5 people deep and use your best of your abilities to spread yourselves out. So we had a very tough conversation. But in the end, it was much, much better. We figured out all these things over a few weeks, got new drills, split the coaches up, made better rotation schedules, and things have been going well. So just an example there for a very practical way to approach that. But hopefully that helps, especially in the terms of like context. Like that was very important to have that conversation separate from a busy workout. We had that after, one of the events, things like that. So everyone can kind of sit and digest and think. Okay, I think this is a personal level. This is something that this book on the right just came out, Stillness by Ryan Holiday, is very good. This was by far the most thing that I still struggled with on a daily basis, is trying to make sure there's time to have time for myself, not be so busy, not always be on my phone, on social media, be on conversations or work or doing something or being busy, just having time to get space, right, to think and digest these things and think through tough problems. And I think this happens a lot with our busy modern lives. This also happens quite a bit in the gym. Is like we always feel like we should be on the next event. You should be running right to the next drill. You should be doing drills. Boom, boom, boom. There's no time for rest. Keep going harder, get more turns, get more reps, squeeze more in, more hours, right? I think that while productivity is important, there's a very fine line between productivity and maniacal burnout, right? Of pushing yourselves and the kids to do, 40 hours of work in a 20-hour practice schedule. So you need to be careful about that. And I think earlier in my years, especially as shift was first starting, I was working 80 to 100 hours per week, and I was not taking care of myself. And that's just very, very honest. But it did not help long term, right? And I think in short spurts, so say if you have a really big deadline in a month and you have to work really crazy, that I completely understand, and it comes and goes. But there's no way that you can sustain that long term. And I think that anybody realizes that in their own personal life and their work life, in the coaching life, whatever it is, there's no way that you can expect someone to go that hard every day. And we talk about that a lot of terms of like strength and conditioning and pushing the kids for skills, but that also goes for our personal life too. And think about kids have school, kids have other stuff going on. You have a personal life, you have other things going on. So it's okay to take breaks and to have some time to just not do anything or to give yourself time to recharge your batteries, right? So a couple ways people do this is journaling. I prefer that. Meditating the first hour of their day, no cell phone, no listening to people, just doing their own time to whatever makes them happy, whether that's music, whether that's books, whether that's a cup of coffee, whether that's watching the news for some people, like whatever it is, but just giving yourself time, 30 minutes to just do what makes you calm and happy can set the stage for a lot of time productively used during the rest of the day. And sometimes people get a little bit more intense with this. And I think that I've done a few of these myself, but Steve Jobs, for example, right, he would take an entire week and just go to a cabin and read a lot of books and think and just not do anything, right? I've done this in a couple of weekends where I just take Friday, Saturday, Sunday, go to my lake house in Maine and just shut off all my technology and just bring a bunch of books and read and think and stuff like that. So wherever people are out in the spectrum, from 15 minutes in the morning for a cup of coffee to, a week-long retreat, you have to do kind of what fits your schedule and your context. Obviously, people are different with families and kids and spouses and stuff like that. But something of that nature, I think, goes a long way. Okay, this comes from a couple studies that I read, but then also a few books that are really good. So it seems to be that shared vulnerability is one of the biggest successful characteristics of successful cultures, and in the long term, something that makes many people more happy. So I read this study about it in Google. They studied all the most successful employees and their teams about who is the most innovative, who is the happiest, stuff like that. And it came down to the fact that people who could build an environment where they didn't feel like they were going to get attacked if they had a silly idea or a dumb idea, seemed to be the most creative and the most productive in terms of like building new projects, right? So in teams of 5 to 7 people where they could just freely think about their ideas and they weren't going to get, oh, that's a stupid idea or that's dumb or get laughed at, right? And I think a lot about this in the gym too, in terms of like the team sharing ideas or being vulnerable or being okay with rejection or failure, like in a social context world. Kids that are always taught perfectionism and no failure is very, very unhealthy long term. And especially in a workspace, people who come up with new ideas or think about new things and just get shut down by their boss or shut down by their coworkers or laughed at and stuff like that. Those are the people that don't want to share new ideas or come up with new things because they feel like they're always going to get kind of crapped on. So Google's most successful teams had these emotional think spaces where they were able to be vulnerable and kind of share these ideas. They didn't feel like they were going to get trashed for it. But then also more work into stuff with Brene Brown, the Navy SEALs, and many other big companies showed that, again, that Culture Code book was really, really good show that these kind of shared states of vulnerability from a leadership point of view, but then also having space to be, thinking out loud and not get chastised for it. Those things were huge for what they called micro moments, right? So when like small little interactions between a leader and people who follow them in terms of like building trust and rapport and being heard and being seen and being listened, that stuff made a huge difference in the overall happiness of the leader, but then also the people who are involved in the environment. So in gymnastics, I think about this as like, just before warm up, right? Coming in and a coach being like, hey, how'd that test go? Right? Like, I knew that was a lot on your mind. You're like, hey, how's your brother doing? I knew he was having a tough time. Or, how are things going with this? How's the rest of your life going? Like those small little human level interactions build trust in the bank between coaches and athletes, and they make both parties happier. But then also, like, I was just reflecting back on that vault setup, having a group meeting and saying like, hey guys, anything going on, things we need to work on? Is there a problem we need to air out? With a coaching staff, having a weekend review, if you guys have like a 20-minute debrief on Fridays or Saturdays or monthly staff meetings, stuff like that, like opening up these spaces for honest, candid conversations, I think sometimes goes a huge way for people being happy because they feel like, okay, people listen to what I say, they value my opinion. We're actually addressing the real root causes of issues in our gym versus sweeping them under the rug. And, we're dealing with some of these problems versus looking the other way. So I highly encourage people to read those books, but then also to try to do some of these small little things day to day in their life. It's definitely not comfortable. That is for sure. But I think one of my favorite quotes of all times is that discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. So keep that in mind when you're having some of these moments in the gym. Okay, kind of moving forward, again, based off of the that ACT book, which is the therapy book, which is really good. But the best thing we have to do after all this kind of thinking and journaling is actually do something about it, right? So I think you have to make sure that you are committing to small little habits or changes in your daily life that will actually increase your levels of happiness, right? So this was really hard for me because I'm a guy who likes to see results kind of right away from the things they do. And unfortunately, sometimes these things take time to change. They take time to get right. But Atomic Habits is a very, very good book that came out last year, and it talks about how you can actually change your habits and make meaningful, choices in your life stick versus just, good for a week and then back. And so, like I said, on a personal level, these things have to happen first. Like commit to 30 minutes more of sleep, right? Or one meal per day that's healthier, or that 30-minute walk, or keeping the water bottle on you and stuff like that. 30 minutes a day to think to yourself. Start with all the little things that you can do on your own to be happier and healthier. Then you can start going on a one-on-one level with the athletes you work with, the coworkers you kind of be with, right? The way you approach conversations, the way you listen versus like how much you talk, right? Your optimism versus pessimism in your mindset. Like all those little things can then open up that conversation one-on-one to a group scale, right? So creating family rules in your gym, or having new expectational habits of the way you approach stuff, establishing new cultural behavior standards in your gym, or the way your staff works about a certain problem, or the way you guys are going to attack a certain issue, and having conversations, stuff like that. And then lastly, you can spend that up onto a more global level, right? How is the time and effort going to be spent in your gym? What's the priority focus of the month? What's the motivational source we try to stand by for all of the kids and all of the coaches and stuff like that, leading through inspiration over fear and stuff like that, like bigger concepts. But I firmly believe you have to start with those individual things on your own and improve little by little before you start working your way up to the higher habits. So again, that book, Atomic Habits, is great. Tools of Titan is by Tim Ferriss, and it has tons and tons of great pieces of advice from lots of very successful musicians, business owners, sports, professional athletes, stuff like that. Okay, last thing I'll end on here is I think that you are ultimately in control of you, right? So you have to make sure that you are consciously building the environment that makes you successful. And so the quote is, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This is very, very relevant here. So, you have to be, to the best of your ability, you have to make sure that you're hanging out with people who are on the same path as you, have the same habits, the same goals, the same values, right? And that gets very tough in a work environment because unfortunately you don't always control, who you are spending time with because of, the gym's hire, stuff like that, or what gymnasts are on the team and stuff. But you can absolutely make more conscious decisions about how much time you spend with them, or the way that person influences you, right? So if someone is, I know this is everybody, right? This could be family, this could be friends, this could be coworkers, whatever. Someone's constantly pessimistic and looking negative at things and is complaining and is miserable, you have to kind of snip that person out of your life as best as you can, because it's just, you can't force people to change. You can suggest it, but it's really up to them. So doing your best to, change who you hang out with, change the type of books you read, the type of media you consume, the type of activities that you do in your daily life that contribute to happiness. Like that is 1000% your choice, nobody else's, and it's accountability for you to take care of that. So spend more time with people who actually lift you up versus beat you down, and then also make sure that you're spending your time on activities and media that actually make you happier and contribute to healthier or happier lifestyles. They don't just drag you through the mud. So another book of Tim Ferriss is this Tribe of Mentors, which is, again, just advice on this kind of concept of spending your time to be happier. Good People is one of my favorite all-time books about what goes into good people and who you want to find space to hang out with, because they can give themselves more opportunities to positively affect your life. So I really like those two books, and I've gifted this book to a ton of people. So 2 more things to check out. So if you guys have any questions about all this stuff, I'd love to get a discussion going. I will definitely make a list of all those books and link them to Amazon so people can check them out. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you in the group.